The night begins like any other, but the silence feels older here, like it's been waiting for someone to disturb it. The hallway stretches endlessly, lined with doors that no longer have numbers. The wallpaper, once gold, now hangs in strips like shedding skin. The faint buzz of a dying bulb flickers overhead, casting a heartbeat rhythm across the corridor. Each flash reveals something slightly different. A handprint on the wall, a shape in the distance, gone when the light steadies. A soft voice breaks the stillness. The narrator speaks as if standing just behind the viewer, close enough to feel the warmth of their breath. Every hotel has its ghosts. The voice murmurs. Some are memories, some are mistakes, and some are still waiting to check out. A slow, cinematic sweep glides through the abandoned lobby. The grand chandelier above, heavy with dust, swings slightly though no wind stirs. The piano in the corner begins to play a single note by itself, its string vibrating like an old heartbeat. A guest book lies open on the counter. Names scrawled in faded ink seem to rearrange themselves when the camera isn't looking. One signature reads yours. In the reflection of the front desk mirror, we see flashes of what's to come. A couple screaming in a snowstorm. A woman staring at her own empty reflection. A hand reaching from the dark to pull someone into a flooded room. Each vision lasts a heartbeat, each ending with the same static hiss. Like the film reel is breaking. The air feels heavy, electric with memory. The narrator continues, their tone soft, hypnotic. These are the rooms the world forgot. Places where sorrow sank into the floorboards, where laughter turned into echoes. Some say walls can't feel. But what if they do? What if every tear, every scream, every last breath leaves something behind? A door at the end of the hallway creaks open on its own. Inside, faint candlelight trembles. The corridor narrows as the camera glides closer. Footsteps sound, but there's no one in frame. A whisper curls through the dark. A voice layered over another, hundreds speaking at once. The whispers form a single word. Stay. The narrator's voice lowers to almost a whisper. Tonight we'll travel through 12 such places. Real hotels. Real stories. Each room still stands somewhere in the world, quietly breathing, pretending to be empty. But the truth is, a pause. A faint thump echoes above, like a footstep from the floor above though the building is abandoned. They never really let anyone leave. The camera pans past the open door into a room filled with faint fog. A half-burned candle flickers beside an old telephone, its cord cut clean. A faint hum fills the air, like static from an untuned radio. The closer the camera moves, the more distorted the sound becomes. Snippets of distant voices, laughter, the cry of a baby, and finally, the faint click of a key turning in a lock. The narrator's voice returns, quieter, smoother now. Our first story begins far from here, high in the snow-covered mountains of Colorado. A family retreat meant for peace, for rest, for healing. But within its wooden walls, the wind still carries the whispers of those who never made it out. The candle flame suddenly goes out. Darkness swallows the frame. For a long moment, there's only silence. Then, from somewhere deep in the dark, a single breath, close, human, trembling. The sound of it fades slowly, replaced by the rising hiss of static. The narrator's tone shifts to a chilling calm. If you're still here, don't move. Don't look away. You've already stepped into the first room. A distant gust rattles unseen windows. Then, slowly, the whisper returns, soft, rhythmic, echoing through the static, guiding us into the first tale. Welcome, the voice says, to the Whispering Inn. The road wound endlessly through the white silence of the mountains, where snowflakes fell like ashes. Ethan gripped the steering wheel tighter as the tires crunched over ice, his knuckles pale beneath the dim dashboard glow. Beside him, Lila watched the falling snow with tired eyes, her breath fogging the window. They had come to the Whispering Inn for peace, a weekend away from the chaos of their city lives, a chance to start over after too many sleepless nights and unspoken arguments. The inn appeared through the fog like a ghost emerging from memory. A sprawling, wooden structure, its roof heavy with snow, the sign swinging gently on rusted chains. The words "The Whispering Inn" were barely legible, weathered by years of mountain storms. Inside, the air smelled of cedar, smoke, and something faintly metallic. The fire crackled in the lobby, casting orange light across portraits whose eyes seemed to follow them. The innkeeper, an elderly woman with trembling hands, greeted them with a thin smile. "You're lucky," she said softly. "You've got the whole place to yourselves." Her voice was raspy, like dry leaves scraping stone. She handed them an old brass key, its tag engraved with the number 7. "Keep the windows closed at night. The wind carries strange things up here." Their room was warm and inviting. A fireplace, 2 armchairs, a bed heavy with quilts. Lila exhaled, finally relaxing. "It's perfect," she whispered, her voice small against the storm outside. But as she unpacked her bag, she paused. "Ethan, do you hear that?" At first it was faint, like air moving through a vent. Then it grew clearer. A whisper, soft and rhythmic, threading through the walls. Ethan tilted his head. "It's just the wind," he said, forcing a laugh. "Old place like this, it breathes." That night, as the fire died to embers, the whispers returned. Lila lay awake, eyes open in the dark. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Someone was speaking her name. It came from the vent above the bed, soft and deliberate, like breath brushing her ear. "Ethan," she whispered, shaking his shoulder. "Someone's in the walls." He sat up groggily, listening. The sound faded, replaced by the soft patter of snow. He sighed. "You're hearing things. It's been a long drive." But the next morning, when Ethan checked his phone, he found an audio recording he didn't remember making. He pressed play, frowning. Static filled the speakers. Then, buried beneath it, came the same whisper, clear, distinct. His own voice sang her name. His throat went dry. "Lila," he murmured. "Come listen." She pressed close, eyes wide, listening to the voice on the recording repeat her name again and again. Her hands began to shake. "That's not you," she said. "That's not your tone." Throughout the day, Lila tried to ignore it, but every quiet moment was haunted by the whispers. When she walked past the hallway, the air vent breathed her name again. When she entered the bathroom, the pipes hissed in patterns that almost sounded like words. Ethan checked every vent, every crawlspace, nothing but cold air and dust. By the second night, sleep was impossible. Lila sat upright by the fire, her eyes red, her fingers trembling. "They're trying to tell us something," she whispered. "They know our names." Ethan paced the floor, his nerves unraveling. "There's got to be an explanation," he muttered. "Sound travels weird up here. Echoes, wind tunnels." The fire flickered. From deep within the walls came a sound like metal scraping stone. Lila gasped. The whispers rose again, layered this time. Many voices murmuring at once, all speaking her name. Ethan shouted into the vent, his voice shaking. "Who's there?" For a moment, silence. Then a single whisper replied, soft, mocking, his own voice. The room seemed to tilt. The walls groaned. The lights dimmed. A gust of freezing air swept through, extinguishing the fire. The whispers became screams now, rushing like a storm through every vent, every crack, every shadow. Lila clutched Ethan's arm. "We have to leave," she cried. They fled into the snow, half-dressed, boots sinking deep into the drifts. The wind howled, but underneath it, the whispers followed. Disembodied voices carried on the icy air. When they reached the car, Ethan froze. The windshield was fogged from the inside. Scrawled across the glass, written in frost, were the words, "We're still here." Days later, rescue workers found the inn abandoned, every window sealed shut from the inside. No sign of Ethan or Lila. Only the faint sound of whispering when the wind passed through the vents. They say the inn was built over an old mining tunnel, collapsed long ago, sealing the miners inside. Their last moments were spent shouting into the dark, voices swallowed by stone. Locals claim that on cold winter nights, When the mountain wind is right, those same voices rise through the vents, searching for someone, anyone, to hear them. The narrator's voice fades to a low murmur. Some walls remember everything, and some whisper until you answer. A long silence. Then, a faint breath against the microphone. Soft, near your ear. Can you hear them now? Renee had always believed that photographs told the truth. Through her lens, the world made sense. Shadows and light in perfect harmony. When she arrived at the old Hotel Montecito in California, camera in hand, she wasn't looking for ghosts or mysteries. She was chasing beauty, the faded kind that lingered in places the world had forgotten. The hotel was a monument to a bygone era. High ceilings, velvet drapes, a grand chandelier that glittered weakly in the dust-choked light. It felt timeless, but beneath that elegance was something fractured, like the echo of a song sung too many times. She signed the guest book at the front desk, her name the only one on the page. The clerk, a thin man with a glassy smile, handed her a brass key without speaking. His reflection in the counter's polished surface didn't quite match his movements. Renee blinked, dismissed it as a trick of the light, and carried her bags upstairs. Room 212 greeted her with a strange stillness. The walls were pale, almost colorless, and a massive mirror hung opposite the bed. Its silver surface was dulled with age, but it drew her in. She ran a finger across the glass, tracing the patterns of dust. Her reflection looked slightly off. The lighting, perhaps. The angle. She shrugged it off and began unpacking her gear. At golden hour, she roamed the corridors with her camera. Her boots echoed on the tiled floor as she captured the ballroom, the sweeping staircase, the portraits of guests who had long since turned to dust. Every frame she took was perfection. Light slicing through the air like a blade, dust motes suspended like stars. Yet when she returned to her room to review the photos, something was wrong. In every image, the reflections were missing. The ballroom's mirror reflected only emptiness. The chandeliers hung in space without their glass doubles. Her own reflection was absent entirely. It was as though she had been erased from her own work. Her pulse quickened. She checked her lenses, her exposure settings, everything was correct. Still, the photos felt hollow. That night, she stood before the mirror again, her face pale in the lamplight. "Maybe I'm just tired," she whispered to herself. The mirror stared back, silent. She raised her camera, snapping a test shot. The shutter clicked. When she checked the preview screen, the mirror was empty once more. But now, in the background, something else appeared. A dark figure standing where she had been. Her heart slammed in her chest. She turned quickly, but the room was empty. Just the whisper of the wind through the cracked window and the slow ticking of the wall clock. She deleted the image, but the sound of the shutter seemed to linger in the air, like the memory of a scream. The following morning, she asked the clerk if the mirror had ever been replaced. His eyes flicked up from the ledger. "That mirror?" he said softly. "It's been here since the beginning, since before this place was even a hotel." He smiled, but his lips didn't move in the reflection behind him. Renee felt the weight of unease growing heavier. She walked through the hotel again, snapping photos compulsively, desperate to prove she wasn't losing her mind. In the dim light of the ballroom, her reflection began to distort, lagging behind her movements, then freezing completely while she continued to walk. It stood still, watching her, its mouth slowly opening in a silent scream. Panicked, she ran back to her room, bolted the door, and pulled the curtains shut. The mirror loomed across from her, swallowing the room's weak light. She tried not to look, but something in her drew her gaze. The reflection was wrong again. The furniture slightly shifted, the bed unmade when it was not. In the mirror's world, time moved differently. When she finally dared to approach, she noticed her reflection smiling faintly, even though she wasn't. The face in the glass tilted its head. She stumbled back, knocking over her camera. The flash went off. The room filled with white light, and for a split second, she saw the truth. The mirror didn't reflect her at all. It reflected the hotel itself, and behind the glass, the Montecito was decayed, waterlogged, abandoned. The walls bled with cracks, the ceiling hung in tatters. And within that ruined reflection, dozens of figures watched her from the shadows. Renee screamed. The sound seemed to echo from both sides of the glass. She turned to flee, but the door had vanished, replaced by more wall. Her camera lay in pieces on the floor, the lens cracked open like an eye. The reflection moved closer, its hand pressed against the other side of the mirror. The glass rippled like water. The next morning, the clerk found room 212 empty. The bed was neatly made, her belongings stacked carefully by the door. But when he glanced at the mirror, his face drained of color. A faint outline of a woman's palm was pressed against the inside of the glass, perfectly detailed, as though it had been made from within. To this day, the Hotel Montecito still stands, quietly decaying under the California sun. Guests who wander its halls claim that the mirrors give no reflection at all, only glimpses of another version of the hotel, a darker one, where every mirror is a window and every window is a door. The narrator's voice lowers, almost a whisper. Some places forget their reflections to protect themselves. Others erase them because what they see staring back is too terrible to remember. A pause. The sound of a camera shutter echoes once more. Click. Then silence. The fog came down from the mountains like a living thing, rolling, coiling, swallowing the narrow road hole. The headlights of the van cut no further than a few meters ahead, pale beams vanishing into white nothingness. Inside, 6 hikers sat in uneasy silence. They had been walking for 2 days, drenched and cold, and when the sign finally appeared out of the mist, the Devil's Rest Lodging and Ale, it felt like salvation. The inn stood crooked at the edge of a cliff, its roof glistening with rain, windows glowing faintly through the fog. The stone walls seemed older than the hills around them, weathered by centuries of storms. As they pulled their muddy boots across the threshold, the warmth of a fire greeted them, along with the smell of peat and whiskey. A man sat behind the counter, his eyes hidden beneath the brim of a cap. "No one comes this far in October," he said quietly. "The passes are closed." "We lost the trail," Callum replied, rubbing his arms. "We just need a place to dry off for the night." The innkeeper nodded slowly. "You can have the rooms upstairs. But if the bell tolls after midnight, don't look through the window." Laughter rippled through the group. Superstition was charming in the daylight, but at midnight in the Highlands, it carried a weight that no one dared to mock out loud. The 6 of them, Callum, Mara, Felix, Owen, Lara, and June, took their rooms, drank hot soup, and tried to shake the feeling that the fog outside wasn't just weather, but a presence watching through the glass. The wind howled like an animal. The fire burned low. One by one, they drifted to bed. Sometime after midnight, the bell rang. It wasn't a gentle chime. It was a deep, ancient sound, echoing through the stone halls, vibrating in their bones. Callum sat upright in bed, heart pounding. He glanced at his watch, 12:17. The bell rang again. He remembered the innkeeper's warning and tried to ignore it. But curiosity has a gravity of its own. He rose quietly, padding to the small window above his bed. The fog pressed thick against the glass, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Then the mist thinned for a heartbeat, and Callum froze. Outside, beneath the leaning cross of the inn's weather vane, lay 6 bodies, perfectly still in the snow. His breath caught in his throat. He leaned closer. The faces were unmistakable. Himself and his friends, sprawled lifelessly across the frozen ground. He stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." He turned to wake Mara, but she was already sitting up, eyes wide and wet with terror. "I saw it too," she whispered. "In my window." The others came rushing into the hall, all pale, all shaking. Each had seen the same vision from their windows, their own bodies lying dead outside. The bell tolled again, shaking dust from the rafters. Felix shouted, "It's a trick! Someone's trying to scare us." He stormed downstairs, but when they followed, the lobby was empty. The fire was out. The front door hung open, creaking in the wind. Beyond it, the fog was alive, Shapes moved within it, tall, wavering figures with no faces, drifting closer each time the bell sounded. The hikers stumbled back, barricading the door. The floorboards groaned beneath their feet as if the inn itself were breathing. Upstairs, Callum shouted. They ran, their footsteps echoing like drums. The hallway seemed longer than before, stretching, bending, the doors warping into unfamiliar numbers. Behind them, a low moan rose from the fog, deep and resonant, like the earth itself was mourning. In room 4, they huddled together, whispering prayers. The bell rang once more, and this time, the sound came from inside the walls. A small crack split the plaster above the fireplace, and black smoke began to seep through. The room filled with the smell of iron and rot. The smoke twisted into shapes, arms, faces, open mouths, reaching, pleading. Lara screamed as a cold hand brushed her shoulder. Felix grabbed the lamp and threw it against the wall. The room exploded in sparks. For a moment, everything froze. The air, the light, even the sound. Then the vision shifted. The firelight dimmed, and the walls around them turned black with soot. The floor beneath their feet was no longer wood, but stone. They were standing inside a mine. Pickaxes lay rusted beside skeletons. Helmets with shattered lamps littered the ground. The whispers came from all sides now. Dozens of voices crying for help, echoing endlessly. Callum turned in circles, gasping for air. The others were gone. Only the sound of the bell remained, distant but constant. He saw movement ahead, a doorway carved into the stone. A dim light flickered beyond it. He stumbled forward, desperate to escape, but the moment he crossed the threshold, the world shifted again. He was back in his room at the inn, alone. The wind had stopped. The fog was gone. He ran to the window. The ground below was empty. No bodies, no footprints, just untouched snow. For a brief moment, relief flooded through him. Then, from somewhere deep in the walls, a muffled sound. His own voice whispering softly, calling his name. When rescuers found the Devil's Rest weeks later, the building was abandoned. The fire had long gone cold. But in the silence of the upper rooms, faintly, when the wind was just right, they swore they could hear 6 voices whispering in unison. A warning or perhaps an invitation. The narrator's tone fades to a hush, almost reverent. They say the highlands remember their dead. But sometimes the land doesn't wait for you to die before it claims you. A distant echo of the bell tolls once more. Then only fog. The Stanley Hotel rests beneath the shadow of the Rocky Mountains, its white facade glowing against the thin Colorado mist. The night air is crisp, filled with the scent of pine and the faint hum of wind that travels through the valleys like a voice searching for an answer. Inside, warm chandeliers flicker above empty hallways, their light bending and warping against the antique mirrors that line the walls. Guests whisper about one particular room, room 217, where something unseen, but ever-present, lingers between this world and whatever lies beyond. The story begins with Elise, a travel blogger and skeptic of the supernatural, who checked into room 217 with her camera and notebook. Her plan was to debunk the legends that claimed this was the room where the spirit of a maid named Elizabeth Wilson still roamed, the woman who, in 1911, was caught in a gas explosion that nearly killed her. Elise had done her research. She wanted to expose the ghost stories for what she believed they were, folklore inflated by tourists and fear. But as night fell and the wind began to scratch at the window panes, her confidence began to wither. The room was breathtaking, vintage furniture, a clawfoot tub, and a massive bed draped in crimson velvet. Yet something about it felt alive. The air seemed to pulse, faintly, like the rhythm of a heartbeat. Elise set up her tripod, pressed record, and began narrating into her microphone. I'm spending the night in room 217, the room Stephen King once stayed in when he dreamt of his haunted hotel. Let's see what all the fuss is about. Her laughter was light, dismissive, but when she played back the first few seconds of her recording, there was a whisper layered beneath her voice. It was faint, just 2 words, but clear enough to freeze her blood. Get out. Elise turned off the recorder and stared into the camera lens, as if expecting to see someone standing behind her. The light on the bedside lamp flickered. She laughed again, forcing a breath she didn't feel, and returned to her script. But as she continued speaking, the whisper came again, louder this time, from the direction of the bathroom. The faucet began to drip, the sound rhythmic, almost deliberate. She grabbed her phone and walked toward the sound, whispering to herself that it must just be the plumbing. But when she reached the door, she saw the mirror fogging over, though the air was ice-cold. A single word appeared on the glass, drawn by an unseen hand. "Stay." Her pulse thundered in her ears. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice cracking. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt alive. And then the doorknob began to turn. Slow, deliberate, as if someone on the other side was testing whether she would run. She stumbled back toward the bed, knocking over her camera, which hit the floor and began recording on its own. The screen flickered with static, and for a brief, horrifying moment, the reflection in the TV screen showed the outline of a woman in old-fashioned maid attire standing beside Elise, pale, sorrowful eyes watching her. Elise's scream echoed through the empty corridors of the hotel. Moments later, a staff member passing by knocked on her door, concerned by the noise. When he entered, the room was empty. No sign of Elise, no luggage, no equipment. Only the faint scent of burnt gas lingered in the air, like a century-old memory that refused to fade. The man turned toward the mirror above the dresser, and there, written faintly in condensation, were the same two words Elise had seen. "Stay here." The next morning, room 217 was locked and sealed by management, though no official report was made. Yet that night, a guest walking past the door claimed she heard someone crying softly from inside. A young woman's voice, whispering apologies between sobs. When asked later, she swore it wasn't the maid's voice she heard. It was modern, desperate, like someone who didn't belong in another time. The Stanley Hotel continues to attract thrill-seekers, ghost hunters, and curious skeptics. Some stay in room 217 hoping to feel what others claim to have felt. The brush of cold air against the back of the neck, the sound of invisible footsteps pacing the room at 2 a.m., or the faint smell of smoke when there is no fire. And while most guests leave with nothing more than goosebumps and stories, a few speak of waking in the night to see the outline of a woman at the foot of their bed, and a figure behind her, faint, holding a camera, mouthing the words, "Get out." As the narration fades, the sound of distant whispers echoes, blending with the low hum of wind outside the hotel. The lights flicker once, twice, then cut to black. The story lingers like a breath in the dark, urging the listener to wonder. What happens to those who don't believe until it's too late? Transition. The camera pans out of the Stanley Hotel and into another distant skyline, neon lights reflecting off wet pavement, the hum of city life hiding something sinister within its walls. The next story begins not in an old hotel, but in a modern one. Sleek, expensive, and harboring horrors just as ancient. Los Angeles never truly sleeps, and neither does the Cecil Hotel. Its tall, aging frame stands like a relic against the city's restless glow, a structure soaked in history, scandal, and whispers of death. Neon lights flicker against the cracked windows, casting shadows that move when nothing else does. The air outside hums with traffic, but inside, everything is still. The walls seem to listen. They've heard it all. The cries, the secrets, the final breaths of the lost souls who checked in but never checked out. Miles, a documentary filmmaker chasing the macabre, arrived one late evening with his sound engineer, Jordan. They were working on a series titled America's Cursed Hotels. The Cecil was to be their grand finale, the one that would make the audience question what they believed about haunted places. Miles, hardened by years of skepticism, wasn't afraid. He'd seen enough haunted locations to know most could be explained away by bad wiring, old pipes, or paranoia. Yet something about the Cecil's presence unnerved him. The lobby felt heavy, suffocating even, with air so thick it seemed to resist breathing. They were given room 1402, not officially haunted, but rumored to be one of the few rooms that guests had repeatedly requested to be changed from in the middle of the night. The clerk, an older woman with a distant, glazed expression, warned them with an emotionless tone. "Stay clear of the mirrors after midnight," she said. "And if you hear the elevator stop on your floor with no one inside, don't look in." Her words hung in the air longer than they should have. Jordan laughed nervously, brushing it off, but Miles recorded it anyway. Every detail mattered to him. The room was dimly lit, with peeling wallpaper and a faint smell of iron, like blood and rust combined. Jordan set up the sound equipment while Miles began his narration. "The Cecil Hotel has been called the most cursed building in America, a place where tragedy repeats itself, as if something here is feeding on the despair." The microphone picked up a faint hum, an interference that pulsed like a heartbeat. Miles adjusted the gain, but the hum grew louder. When Jordan checked the cables, he froze. "Dude, it's not the gear. It's coming from the walls." They pressed their ears against the wallpaper and heard it. A woman's voice, muffled, crying softly. The sound was faint at first, like a memory playing on repeat, but then it sharpened into something chillingly clear. "Help me." Jordan recoiled, his face pale. That's a recording, right?" Miles wanted to agree, but the fear crawling up his spine told him otherwise. The sound was coming from inside the wall. Not behind it, inside it. As the clock struck 12:03 a.m., the temperature plummeted. The light above the bed flickered violently before dying out completely. Miles grabbed his camera light, but the moment it turned on, the reflection in the room's mirror caught his eye. There was movement. A dark figure stood behind him. Not fully visible, but its outline warped and flickered, like static in human form. He turned instantly, heart pounding, but the room was empty. Jordan cursed under his breath, his hands trembling as he tried to pack the equipment. The elevator dinged outside their room. Both men froze. The sound echoed down the hall, followed by the soft creak of doors opening. "Did you call it?" Miles whispered. Jordan shook his head. The elevator door slid open again, but this time the sound was closer, too close. When Miles peered into the hallway, the elevator stood open, empty, its interior light flickering. He could swear he heard faint breathing inside. Slowly, the doors began to close, and in that instant a reflection. A woman in soaked clothes, her hair covering her face, appeared between them. The doors slammed shut. Jordan bolted toward the room, muttering he'd had enough, but the doorknob wouldn't turn. Something was holding it shut from the inside. He pounded on the door, shouting for Miles to help, but Miles was frozen in front of the mirror, his eyes wide, unblinking. His reflection was no longer his own, it was hers. The drowned woman's face stared back, her mouth moving, whispering words he couldn't understand. The surface of the mirror began to ripple, as if it were made of water. Jordan screamed his name, but when he turned to grab Miles, there was no one there. Only the camera remained, rolling on the floor. On its footage, the last thing captured was Miles reaching toward the mirror, and then silence. When police arrived the next morning after reports of screaming from guests down the hall, room 1402 was empty. Both men were gone. The footage they recovered was corrupted, except for a few seconds of static and one chilling whisper buried beneath it. "Come closer." To this day, the Cecil Hotel remains a monument of mystery and dread. Tourists flock to it, curious to glimpse the place where so many lives unraveled. But the staff no longer rents room 1402. They say the mirror is covered now, though sometimes late at night, guests walking past swear they hear knocking from the other side of the glass. Transition. The static fades into a low hum as the scene shifts. The neon lights of Los Angeles dissolve into the golden warmth of the American South. A picturesque bed and breakfast where charm hides something ancient and unforgiving. The next story whispers from the swamps, where hospitality masks the hunger of the dead. Nestled deep in the humid heart of Louisiana, the Magnolia House stands like a ghost frozen in time. Draped in ivy and surrounded by swamp mist, its white columns gleam under the pale glow of the moon, while the air buzzes with the songs of unseen insects. The scent of magnolia blossoms hangs thick and sweet, masking something sour underneath. Decay, perhaps, or something older. Locals whisper that the inn was built on cursed land, that the marsh beneath it feeds not only on water, but on sorrow. The story begins with Natalie and her husband, Tom, a young couple from Chicago who'd driven down for a romantic getaway. They'd booked Magnolia House for its southern charm and antique beauty, unaware of the dark history tied to its walls. The innkeeper, a woman named Miss Delphine, greeted them with a smile that never reached her eyes. Her skin was pale and drawn, her hair streaked with white, though she couldn't have been older than 40. "Dinner's at 7, she said in a voice that felt rehearsed. "And remember, sugar, don't wander past the porch after dark. The swamp gets mighty hungry this time of year." Natalie laughed softly, thinking it was just southern folklore. But that night, as the sky turned a bruised shade of purple and the frogs fell silent, she began to understand what Miss Delphine meant. The dinner room glowed with warm candlelight, the scent of roasted meat and spices filling the air. Old portraits lined the walls, men and women from another century, their painted eyes glinting with a strange awareness. As they ate, Natalie felt an unease settle in her chest. The meat tasted strange, rich, almost metallic, and every so often, she caught Miss Delphine staring at her, lips twitching like she wanted to say something but couldn't. Tom, ever the skeptic, joked about it. "Guess they don't have USDA down here." After dinner, Delphine offered them dessert, pecan pie and sweet tea, and whispered, "Y'all best sleep light tonight." When Natalie asked why, she simply said, "Because the house remembers." Later, as they settled into their room, the old floorboards creaked beneath invisible footsteps. The temperature dropped, the window fogging despite the humid air outside. Natalie woke to the sound of whispering, dozens of voices murmuring beneath the floor, like a choir trapped in the earth. She shook Tom awake, but he only mumbled and rolled over. Then she saw them, faint shadows moving just beyond the edge of the bed, their outlines rippling like smoke. One of them leaned close enough for her to hear its voice clearly. "We're hungry." Her scream jolted Tom upright. He flicked on the lamp, but the bulb flickered and died. When he grabbed his phone to use its flashlight, the reflection in the screen showed something standing behind Natalie. A figure with sunken eyes and a mouth that stretched impossibly wide, whispering the same word over and over. "Hungry, hungry, hungry." They bolted from the room, running through the narrow hallway lined with dusty mirrors and faded family photos. Each reflection seemed wrong. The rooms behind them looked brighter, cleaner, alive. But in the real hallway, everything was decayed, coated in mold and rot. The air reeked of death. When they reached the lobby, Miss Delphine stood waiting, holding an oil lamp. "I told you not to wake them," she said softly. "They don't like when strangers eat their food." Behind her, the portraits began to move. Faces shifting, eyes rolling, mouths opening in silent hunger. The walls groaned, as if breathing. The couple sprinted toward the front door, but the air thickened like syrup, slowing their every step. Outside the window, faint shapes moved through the swamp, pale, gaunt figures dragging themselves closer, their faces half dissolved by time. Natalie screamed for help, pounding at the locked door. Tom smashed a chair against it, finally breaking through, only to stumble out into thick fog that swallowed everything. The ground beneath them squelched, wet and soft, and the smell hit them. Blood, earth, and rot. The fog parted just enough for them to see the truth. Half buried in the mud were bones, hundreds of them, tangled with scraps of clothing and jewelry. Natalie clutched Tom's arm, trembling. "We have to go back," she started, but froze. The inn had vanished. All that remained was an empty clearing surrounded by magnolia trees, their roots twisting over the earth like veins. From somewhere in the mist, Delphine's voice floated to them, soft, melodic, and unbearably sad. "You should have stayed inside, sugar. Now the swamp's got your scent." They ran toward the road, but the path kept looping back on itself. The air grew thicker, the whispers louder, until they could barely breathe. Then came the cold, a sudden wave of icy air that extinguished every sound. The last thing Natalie saw before everything went black was a figure stepping out of the fog. Miss Delphine, her eyes hollow, her smile gone. They were hungry, she said. And you fed them well. When search parties arrived 2 days later, they found the couple's car still parked out front of the Magnolia House Inn. The GPS showed no record of movement, and the inn itself didn't exist. The property had been abandoned for nearly 80 years, burned down in a fire that killed everyone inside, guests and staff alike. All that remains are the magnolia trees that bloom unnaturally white, their roots feeding on something deep below. Transition. The fog curls into darkness, swallowing the inn whole. The sound of crickets fades, replaced by the low hum of fluorescent lights. The next story begins in the cold, sterile corridors of a remote mountain hotel, where the ghosts don't haunt the living. They become them. High in the frozen wilderness of northern Alaska, buried beneath relentless snow and eternal silence, stands the Frostvale Lodge, a forgotten relic of the 1960s, once meant for wealthy travelers chasing the northern lights. Now it lies half-swallowed by ice and memory. The wind moans across the tundra, slipping through broken windows and hollow corridors like the whisper of the dead. Inside, everything is preserved, as if time itself froze in place. The cracked leather chairs, the grand piano coated in frost, and the reception bell that still rings when the wind hits it just right. When Ethan, a travel photographer known for exploring abandoned places, arrived with his drone and camera crew, he was eager to capture something cinematic, a glimpse into nature reclaiming man's ambition, he'd said. His small team included Lila, a sound engineer with a quiet fear of isolation, and Ben, the guide who knew the Arctic's temperament better than anyone. They'd planned to stay one night, long enough to film the aurora through the shattered skylights. But Frostvale had other plans. The first few hours were uneventful. The team explored the hallways, documenting the eerie stillness. Dining tables still set, dishes frozen mid-decay. Lila commented that it felt staged, as though everyone had simply gotten up and walked away mid-meal. Ben explained that Frostvale had been abandoned after a brutal blizzard in 1968, when 13 guests disappeared overnight. Their bodies were never found. By sundown, the temperature plummeted below -30 degrees Celsius. They gathered in the lobby beside a makeshift fire, reviewing their footage. That's when Ethan noticed something on the video, a flicker of movement behind one of the frosted windows. A pale face pressed against the glass, watching. He paused the clip and zoomed in, but the image distorted. Probably just glare, Ben muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Later that night, Lila woke to the sound of footsteps crunching over snow outside. She grabbed her parka and flashlight, stepping into the hallway. The lights flickered weakly as if trying to wake from a long sleep. "Ethan?" she whispered. No response. The sound grew louder, slow, dragging steps, like someone walking barefoot across ice. When she reached the end of the corridor, she saw them. Wet footprints melting into the wood floor, leading toward the ballroom. The door creaked open by itself, revealing the vast room bathed in a ghostly blue glow from the moonlight. Tables were overturned, chandeliers hung low, and in the center stood a figure in an old-fashioned coat, staring at the ceiling. Its breath fogged the air in long, heavy bursts. "Sir?" she called out, her voice trembling. The figure turned, and where its eyes should have been, there were only hollow sockets filled with frost. Its jaw unhinged slightly, and a sound escaped. A faint, broken hum that almost resembled a song. Lila stumbled back, dropping her flashlight. When she retrieved it, the figure was gone, but the air was thick with whispers. "Stay warm," they said. "It's cold outside." She ran back to the others, panicked, but Ethan was gone. Only Ben sat near the dying fire, staring blankly at the camera in his hands. "He went to the West Wing," Ben muttered. "He said he saw someone waving." Lila grabbed her coat and followed the direction Ethan had gone, her breath crystallizing in the air. The West Wing was colder, quieter, too quiet. As she walked, her flashlight flickered across portraits of past guests, all smiling, their painted eyes following her. In the final portrait, the faces looked eerily familiar. Ethan, Ben, herself, Her pulse quickened. She pushed open the door at the end of the hall, and there was Ethan, standing perfectly still, camera raised. "Ethan," she whispered. He didn't respond. When she touched his shoulder, his head turned slowly, unnaturally slow, his skin pale and glistening with frost. "They want us to stay," he said softly. "It's so warm here." His lips cracked as he smiled, revealing ice crystals forming between his teeth. Lila screamed, backing away as the air filled with movement. Shadows emerged from the walls, frozen figures, faces blue and lifeless, their mouths open in eternal gasps. They moved without sound, their joints creaking like breaking branches. One of them, a woman in a vintage red coat, reached out, her fingers glistening with ice. "Don't go," she whispered. "You'll freeze before you reach the road." Lila ran through the hallway, the walls warping and pulsing as if alive. She burst through the front doors into a blinding white storm. Behind her, the lodge seemed to exhale a cloud of frost, sighing like something ancient and weary. She stumbled through the snow until her flashlight died. When rescuers found her the next morning, she was barely conscious, frostbitten, and delirious. She mumbled one phrase over and over again. They stayed behind. They wanted warmth. When authorities returned to retrieve Ethan and Ben, Frostvale Lodge was gone. Only a flat expanse of snow remained, untouched, as though nothing had ever stood there. But when the footage from Lila's camera was recovered, the final image showed the lodge intact. Lights glowing warmly from the windows, figures moving inside, smiling at the camera. Today, pilots flying over the region sometimes report seeing those same lights shimmering faintly beneath the snow during aurora nights. They say the guests of Frostvale still dance in the ballroom, forever chasing warmth that will never come. Transition. The howling wind fades into a distant echo, transforming into the low hum of a ceiling fan. The snow dissolves into desert heat, and the story drifts south, to a lonely roadside motel where the dead check in, and the living never quite leave. The Mojave Desert stretches endlessly beneath a dying sun, its dunes glowing like molten gold as the light fades into crimson. Somewhere along the forgotten stretch of Route 90 stands the Desert Mirage Motel, a crumbling oasis surrounded by nothing but sand, wind, and silence. Its neon sign still flickers faintly, the word vacancy, buzzing in uneven rhythm. The air hums with static, and even from a distance, travelers say it feels like the motel is watching them. Mark, a long-haul truck driver, had been driving for 20 hours straight when exhaustion forced him to stop. His radio had been crackling with static for miles, every channel dissolving into whispers that seemed to echo his name. The Mirage appeared out of nowhere, a shimmer in the heat haze that slowly solidified into a small, one-story motel surrounded by rusted cars and a half-dead cactus garden. Relieved, Mark parked his rig and stepped out into the heavy silence. There was no wind now. Even the desert insects had gone still. Inside the lobby, the air was stale and cold, smelling faintly of old cigarettes and dust. A bell sat on the counter, tarnished but polished enough to show a distorted reflection of his face. He pressed it once. The sound echoed longer than it should have. From a back room, a man emerged, tall, thin, wearing an old motel uniform with a crooked name tag that read Roy. His smile was wide, too wide, his eyes a pale gray that never blinked. "Room 9, he said, sliding a brass key across the counter. "We've been expecting you." Mark frowned. "You mean you had a vacancy sign up?" Roy just nodded. "Oh, we always have vacancy." The key was warm in his hand, as if it had just been held. When he reached the door to room 9, the knob turned before he touched it. The air inside was strangely cool despite the desert heat. The walls were yellowed from age. A single lamp buzzed weakly, and on the nightstand lay an old guest book, open to a blank page. Out of habit, Mark signed his name, but the moment he lifted the pen, the ink faded, leaving the paper clean again. He laughed nervously, chalking it up to fatigue. He took a shower, the water lukewarm and smelling faintly metallic. As he toweled off, he heard a voice faintly through the vent, a woman humming a slow, mournful tune. He smiled to himself, thinking some poor soul must be stuck here too. When he stepped out into the hall, however, every door was closed. The only sound was the faint hum of the flickering neon outside. That night, sleep came in uneasy waves. He dreamed of standing in the desert, watching the motel burn. Faces pressed against the windows, screaming silently as smoke poured into the sky. When he woke, the clock beside the bed read 12:03 a.m., though the second hand was jerking back and forth instead of ticking forward. Then came the soft knock at the door. 3 slow taps. He froze. Who's there? No answer. Only the sound of breathing, low, steady, right outside. He approached cautiously, his heart hammering. The peephole was dark, like someone was covering it with their finger. He took a step back, and that's when the voice came. A whisper so close it felt like it was inside the room. You shouldn't have signed the book. Mark spun around. The room was empty. The air had grown heavier, pressing down on him like invisible weight. The mirror on the wall began to fog up despite the cool air. Slowly, words appeared in the condensation. Stay a while. He stumbled back toward the bed, fumbling for his phone, but the screen was black. No signal, no battery. He grabbed his keys and bolted for the door. When he stepped outside, the hallway stretched endlessly in both directions, repeating itself like a looping image. The wallpaper peeled in the same places, the same flickering bulb buzzed above every door. Panicked, he ran, pounding on random doors. Help, please. But each one opened to reveal the same room he'd just left. Room 9, over and over. Finally, he collapsed in the lobby, gasping for air. Roy stood behind the counter again, smiling faintly. Long night, he asked. Mark's voice broke as he shouted, I'm leaving. Roy tilted his head. Oh, you can't check out, sir. You already signed in. The lobby lights flickered once, twice, then cut out completely. When they came back on, Mark was gone. Only the guest book remained on the counter, and there, on a fresh line in faded ink, his name glowed faintly. The next morning, a passing motorist stopped at the motel, desperate for gas and shade. The sign buzzed to life again. Vacancy. Inside, the counter bell gleamed as if freshly polished. A tall, pale man in uniform stood behind the counter, smiling. His name tag read Mark. The desert mirage still stands, or so they say. Travelers swear it appears on nights when the heat is unbearable and the horizon shimmers with illusions. Some even claim to have stayed there, describing the same lobby, the same humming light, the same smiling clerk behind the desk. But when they go back looking for it the next day, there's nothing there. Only sand, and the faint echo of a buzzing neon sign buried half beneath it. Transition. The desert winds fade into the faint sound of waves crashing against the shore. The image of the empty motel dissolves into a seaside view. A lighthouse blinking in the fog, beside a hotel where the sea doesn't just whisper. It calls you by name. The ocean was calm that night, unnaturally calm. No waves crashed against the rocks. No wind carried the scent of salt. Only the sound of distant foghorns and the low hum of the tide moving beneath the surface broke the silence. At the edge of the Cornish coast stood the Drowned Hotel, a grand, Victorian building leaning over the sea like it was waiting to fall. Its windows were clouded with salt and memory, and at high tide, the lower floors vanished beneath the waterline. Locals warned travelers never to go near it after midnight. They said the sea there wasn't just water. It was alive, and it remembered everyone who ever drowned within its reach. Eleanor, a marine biologist, arrived at the coast to study the unusual oceanic phenomena that had been reported for decades: erratic tides, magnetic surges, and lights that glowed beneath the waves. The villagers told her not to stay at the hotel, but she laughed it off, insisting she didn't believe in ghost stories. The caretaker, an elderly man named Bram, met her at the gate. His clothes were damp, his eyes bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept in years. If you hear knocking from below the floor, he warned, don't answer. They just want the door open. Inside, the walls were warped and swollen from years of water damage. The wallpaper peeled like molting skin, and the carpet squelched faintly underfoot. But the strangest thing was the silence. A hollow, dense quiet that seemed to swallow her footsteps. She could almost hear the ocean breathing through the walls. Her room overlooked the black water, where faint ripples glimmered with a bluish light, like bioluminescence pulsing in rhythm with a heartbeat. As she unpacked, she noticed a painting above the bed, a depiction of the hotel itself, half submerged, with ghostly figures floating in the windows. At the bottom of the frame, a faint engraving read, "The sea takes what it owns." That night, the tide rose unusually fast. Eleanor watched from her window as the waves crept higher, licking the base of the hotel. In the moonlight, she could swear she saw shapes moving beneath the surface. Not fish, not seaweed, but human silhouettes drifting slowly upward. When she blinked, they were gone. She shut the curtains and tried to convince herself it was exhaustion. Around midnight, she woke to a soft dripping sound. The air smelled of salt and decay. Water was seeping from under the door, pooling across the floorboards. She opened the door and gasped. The hallway was flooded ankle-deep, moonlight rippling across the surface. The elevator at the far end opened with a groan, spilling out a surge of dark water. Then came the knocking, faint at first, then louder. It echoed from below, rhythmic and desperate. Knock, knock, knock. She followed the sound downstairs, each step creaking under the water's weight. When she reached the lobby, she froze. The front desk was half submerged, the chandelier swaying gently above. Through the glass doors, the ocean lapped calmly, as if it had claimed the entrance. And behind the reception counter stood Bram, or something that looked like him. His clothes were dry now, his skin pale as coral, his eyes milky and distant. "You shouldn't have come here," he said softly, voice echoing like it came from underwater. "They smell new blood." Before she could respond, the floor beneath her groaned and gave way. She plunged into the freezing dark, the water swallowing her scream. For a moment, she couldn't tell which way was up. 1,000 bubbles swirled around her, catching glimpses of faces, pale, drowned faces, reaching for her with bloated fingers. Their eyes glowed faintly blue, their mouths moving in unison as if whispering a prayer she couldn't understand. Then, a hand grabbed hers and pulled her upward. Gasping, she surfaced in what looked like a flooded dining hall. Tables floated overturned, and portraits swayed from the walls. A woman in a soaked 19th century dress stood nearby, her hair drifting like seaweed. "Don't fight it," the woman whispered. "The sea doesn't let go." Her face flickered, shifting between flesh and bone as salt water streamed from her eyes. Eleanor scrambled toward a staircase that still jutted above the rising water. Behind her, the woman's voice grew distorted. "We all checked in, but no one checks out." The words echoed through the halls like a chant. As she climbed, the walls trembled, and water gushed from unseen cracks, flooding faster than nature should allow. When she reached the top floor, she burst into her room, but it wasn't her room anymore. The painting was gone, replaced by a mirror reflecting her soaked, trembling figure. Except the reflection wasn't copying her movements. Slowly it smiled. Behind her, water began to pour from the ceiling, the floorboards bending inward like the room itself was sinking. Eleanor screamed, lunging for the window. But outside, there was no sky, only the black, endless ocean. She pressed her hand to the glass, and a hand pressed back from the other side, pale, cold, and very much alive. With a sharp crack, the window shattered inward, and the sea came roaring in. The next morning, fishermen found pieces of debris floating offshore. Fragments of old furniture, a cracked mirror, and a single brass room key labeled Room 6. No record of the drowned hotel exists today. Maps show nothing but open water where it once stood. Yet, sometimes on nights when the tide pulls unusually high and the fog rolls in thick, sailors claim to see lights beneath the surface. The faint glow of chandeliers, the outline of a building swaying gently in the deep, and faces peering from the windows, still waiting to check out. Transition. The echo of the sea fades into the distant tolling of church bells. The sound grows sharper, colder, until it becomes the rhythmic clang of metal striking stone. the signal that marks the beginning of something far darker, something buried beneath sacred ground. The road to the monastery twisted through the mountains like a scar, fading into mist where the cliffs dropped into the abyss. At its end stood the silent monastery inn, a small lodging built within the remnants of a 14th-century abbey, surrounded by forests that swallowed all light. Its bell tower loomed above, its bronze bell cracked but still hanging, though no one had heard it ring for centuries. Locals claimed the monks had sealed it after a ritual went wrong, a ritual meant to silence the voices of the damned that echoed through the valley. Thomas, a travel writer obsessed with forgotten places, arrived on a stormy afternoon. The rain was relentless, drumming against the windshield as if urging him to turn back. But he was determined to write about the legend, convinced that superstition hid some forgotten truth. The innkeeper, a quiet woman named Sister Agatha, greeted him with a strange politeness. Her face was weathered, her hands trembling as she handed him a room key engraved with a small cross. "The walls are old," she said softly. "If you hear the monks chanting, don't answer. It means they've noticed you." Inside, the inn smelled of cold stone and candle wax. The hallways were narrow, lined with faded frescoes of monks kneeling in prayer, their eyes scratched out as if someone had wanted to erase their devotion. His room was simple: a wooden bed, a desk, and a single window facing the courtyard, where the bell tower rose like a black finger pointing at the sky. The sound of rain filled the silence, but beneath it, he could swear he heard faint murmuring, rhythmic, almost musical, like prayers carried through the wind. That night, the storm worsened. Lightning illuminated the tower in brief, violent flashes. Thomas sat by the window, recording his thoughts, when he noticed movement below. A figure in a hooded robe, walking slowly across the courtyard toward the tower. The figure carried a lantern, but the flame didn't flicker despite the rain. Thomas grabbed his coat and went downstairs, curiosity overpowering fear. The courtyard was freezing, the wind slicing through his clothes. He called out, but the hooded figure didn't respond, vanishing into the shadows of the bell tower. He followed, pushing open the heavy wooden door, which groaned like an old wound reopening. Inside, the air was thick with dust and incense. Stone steps spiraled upward, lit only by the flickering glow of the lantern ahead. He climbed slowly, each step echoing in the hollow tower. Halfway up, he noticed something carved into the wall. Latin inscriptions, each one partially scratched out. He traced one with his fingers, reading aloud, "Vox mortuorum non tacet." The voice of the dead does not fall silent. The words sent a chill through him. When he reached the top, the figure was gone. The cracked bell loomed above, massive and dark. Rain dripped through the ceiling, tapping against the metal in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Then, out of nowhere, the air vibrated. A low hum filled the tower. Not the sound of wind or thunder, but of voices. Whispering, praying, pleading. Thomas stepped back, heart hammering. The bell began to tremble as if stirred by invisible hands. Then it rang. The sound wasn't loud. It was deep, a vibration that cut through the air and into his bones. The moment it rang, everything went still. The rain stopped mid-fall, frozen droplets suspended in the air. The world held its breath. And then the whispers grew louder. He turned and saw them. Silhouettes of monks emerging from the shadows, faces hidden beneath their hoods, hands clasped in prayer. Their lips moved, but their chants came from everywhere at once, echoing through stone and air alike. Thomas stumbled backward, shouting that he was sorry, that he didn't mean to intrude. But the monks didn't stop. Their robes fluttered in a wind that wasn't there. Their faces, when the hoods fell, were hollow, eyeless, jawless skulls that continued to murmur in unbroken rhythm. The bell rang again, louder this time, and Thomas felt his body freeze. His breath caught in his throat. He couldn't move. The leader of the monks stepped forward, his skeletal hand reaching out. In a voice that was both whisper and thunder, he said, "The vow of silence was broken. You heard what was never meant to be heard." The sound of the words rippled through the air, shattering what little light remained. the tower filled with darkness, thick and suffocating, and in that darkness, the chanting became unbearable. 1,000 voices pressing into his skull until all he could do was scream. Then silence. Thomas awoke at dawn, lying in the courtyard, soaked but alive. The sky was pale, and the bell tower was quiet once more. Sister Agatha stood over him, her expression unreadable. "You heard them," she said simply. "Now they'll remember your voice." She turned and walked back into the inn, leaving him trembling on the cold stone. He left that morning, unable to shake the feeling that something was still inside him. Days later, when he tried to record his experience, every playback was the same. A deep tolling bell, followed by faint chanting that grew louder with each replay. By the 5th attempt, his own voice was gone entirely. To this day, guests who stay at the silent monastery report hearing a bell tolling faintly at night, one that hasn't existed for centuries. They say if you listen too closely, you can hear someone whispering behind the sound. A man's voice, begging for it to stop. Transition. The final echo of the bell fades into a static hum, the sound of an old recording looping endlessly, pulling the listener into one last story. A story where memory itself becomes the haunting.